San Esperito.
What's going on, lads? It's Saint Stubby here again for another video, tackling a little bit of a different genre this time with a third-person action-adventure game, Just Cause. So, let me set the scene before we go into detail about my experience with the game, and I'll tell you a little bit about its development, as when I review a game I like to consider how it would be viewed upon release and how it's aged. It was developed by Avalanche Studios and published by Eidos Interactive. The game was released in 2006 to fairly average reviews, such as a 6.8 on IGN and a 7.2 on GameSpot. By about April of 2009, it actually sold 1 million copies and thus warranted a sequel. There's actually about 4 games in the franchise now, with a 5th supposed to be on the way. And even when I played it, it was pretty soon after it came out, during that Xbox 360 era. It actually had released on 4 different platforms: Microsoft Windows, which we now refer to as just PC, the Xbox 360, PlayStation 2, and the original Xbox. I think it's important to remember which consoles are released on, as that impacts on development, as developers often have to learn the new hardware of the Xbox 360. It feels quite weird to call that new now, but they also have to deal with the sluggish original Xbox and PlayStation 2, which might explain things like poor graphics or lacking in depth of content. However, it's also worth mentioning that even with this limitation, the map is about 1,024 kilometers squared, or just under 400 miles wide, big, large, with 21 story missions and over 300 side missions. It's honestly quite insane to think about that when you consider how restricted the developers were with their current hardware. It actually has a number of decent guns too, with 21 weapons such as handheld explosives, shotguns, rocket launchers, etc, etc. There were about 80 drivable vehicles too, so there's certainly some depth and variety in content. So let's move to the story and mission structure, and then I'll head into the more review style stuff. So, the premise is that you play as Rico Rodriguez, an agent who works for the agency, in quotation marks, a CIA-style governmental organisation who aims to destabilize the leader of a place called San Esperito. You might have heard of it in the introduction. The leader is called President Salvador Mendoza, which constantly makes me think of that one Simpsons scene.
Mendoza!
But he's largely uninvolved in the missions up until the end of the game, where you pretty much just get to blast him, then you get a cutscene, which I think is mildly anticlimactic.
Senor, I must warn you. I have seen your force one of these 6 times. I'm not going to show you, but on every occasion, the president won. You know, it didn't matter that he was the president. As long as the bad wins. Anyway, that's me.
You do hear his name pretty often, but he sort of feels like this nebulous entity that you know of, but you don't know. It's usually, you'd get tasked with something like, you know, Mendoza has X item, go and steal it, or destroy it, so that he'll be super mad. So the missions don't really have that much depth to them. There are some good set pieces though, such as when you derail a train with a helicopter in one mission, but it clearly is limited by the hardware, as this happens within a cutscene. Speaking of limitations on the hardware, that CGI looks really plasticky now. It's really neat though to see the early gameplay thrown up on the computer screens that Sheldon uses at random, but overall I think the CGI cutscenes just haven't aged very well. So outside of the missions, the gang's side missions aren't particularly interesting either. There's plenty of them, but they do seem radiant. So usually it's the same as the main missions, but on just a smaller level. So it'll go and be something like, go here, kill enemy, or whatever other task they've given you. Steal a vehicle, for instance. Go back to the person you initially spoke to. Mission complete. However, there is a very fun minigame that I haven't yet mentioned, which are called Liberation Missions. These I think are the saving grace a little bit, and basically what you do is you take over a smaller town or a bigger city by killing enemies and destroying barricades that the enemies have put up, until you reach the town square, and then you'll put up either a rebels or cartel flag depending on your location and who you're siding with in that region. I would like a little bit more variety overall from the missions, but they're all fine, they're passable. Like I said, these liberation missions definitely are a real saviour. There is also collect missions, which basically is just a fancy way of explaining why collectibles. The game doesn't really give you very much for completing these, other than a little bit of lore and respect for a singular faction, depending on who's tasked you to collect the item. So I'd say that side content is a little bit of a mixed bag, really. It could be good, could be bad. Let's move on to the positive and negatives. Let's start positive. The variety of each area is great. It's not just, oh hey, here's a jungle, enjoy. There's real depth to it, and you can travel to jungles, cities, river areas, mountains, snowy locations, plenty of other things as well. This means that the travelling you do is a little more interesting, as at least you have some varied locations to explore, even if some of them look a little bit almost like randomly generated at times, due to how weirdly designed they are, as you can have moments where you'll have big random plots of land kind of jaggedy outside of an area. It's very strange. It's almost as if they just use some kind of tool to pull up the ground and make it look as if there's a mountain structure or hilly structure. There's also actually a really good use for each type of vehicle. So sometimes when I play games such as GTA 5, the only real useful vehicles are the cars, and usually the fastest ones, and maybe the jets and helicopters if the map is huge. But with this, I felt like actually I did try pretty much every single vehicle. If I found it, I would use it, rather than just taking the best 4 vehicles that show up regularly and just abusing that until I find another one. I like that they actually all felt really unique in regards to speed and handling models as well. I think I'd say the gun balance was pretty good as well, although Rico's signature pistols usually were the best option due to having decent range, decent damage, and infinite ammo, so they were a little bit OP compared to everything else. But others you'd get, such as the LMGs, rocket launchers, and explosives, all were great too, and they had their own place within the game, its own little niche. And actually even smaller things such as the pistols you just get off other enemies were still pretty decent. I'd say that the auto aim also really helped a lot. Without it, I think the game would have been a lot worse. It allows you to be a little bit lazy with aim and just take out crowds of enemies a little bit faster, which is a good compensator for the fact that you can die fairly fast and enemies are really vicious. You know, often beaming you from a distance with very capable and powerful weapons, and they're very quick to gang up on you and overwhelm you. The other thing as well that was a little bit more of a balancer was if you died, you'd lose the pickup weapons and you'd have to go back to a safe house to grab more, or just find new weapons from dead enemies, which kind of provided a little bit more reason to go to the safe houses, other than if you're saving or if you die. But even if you do die, you would still keep Rico's pistols, so I feel it didn't totally address the issues. Okay, so we've addressed positives, let's address the negatives now. I think the most annoying thing to me was how the vehicles are so unbelievably weak that 1 or 2 more serious crashes could completely wipe out your car. And in a game where you're constantly being shot at, sometimes for minimal reason or no reason at all, especially when you would drive through a territory which was government owned, and the AI would just start shooting at you, even if you followed every single rule of the road, you'd still get shot at, which was frustrating. So when you have vehicles that have very low health, this could be very, very annoying because you'd be constantly switching cars for no real reason. I also noticed that the AI police would often be totally fine if they had the same types of crashes as you. So say they went headfirst straight into 2 or 3 vehicles, they would still have much more health than your vehicle would. And in a game where you need to explore a huge map, cause carnage, and also need a real level of mobility because the map is huge, this is a real bummer. There actually also were a number of bugs. The worst thing was when I would use the grapple to steal a jet or a chopper or something, and I would try to latch onto the action position to steal the vehicle, but I'd get knocked off and frozen in an animation, which usually then ended up with me dying, thanks to that. I also had a number of smaller bugs, such as weird rendering issues and whatever else, which likely you'll see shortly. So, as the focus of my content now is reviews and achievements, I figured I'd move on to discussing the achievements and which gave me a hard time. Let me know in the comments whether you have played this before and which achievements you liked or disliked. So I think the hardest achievement for me had to be completing all race missions, mainly due to the issues with vehicle health, as often these tracks would lead you right past enemies and sometimes even into their bases, which could be very frustrating as it basically provided a chance for you to lose a vehicle very quickly, and in this game if your vehicle gets blown up you have to entirely restart the race. The events themselves actually were okay, with decent, quite well laid out tracks, apart from the army issues, but the vehicle health was so poor that I had to retry quite a lot of times. I do also remember one race that was for boats, where you had to thread the needle between really tight rivers, and you'd have to avoid a lot of rocks and things as well, which actually was very difficult. On the flip side, I'd say the easiest achievement was getting 100 kills. I don't think I would say it's very easy to go through the whole campaign without doing that, honestly, and the analytics reflect this, with 62.45% of Xbox players having completed this. There are other straightforward achievements, but I think you could literally do this within completing a mission or 2, frankly, or just even getting a wanted level and seeing how long you can hold out. Any time consuming ones, honestly I think the most time consuming one is either completing 50 side missions, as side missions are just very painful after doing about 25, as often it would just be grinding over and over and over again, doing virtually the same thing as I said before, or getting the collectibles from each collect mission. However, with the collect ones, I think it would have been a lot worse had I not have grabbed them along the way to missions, because collect item shop on your map as a little black circle. Firstly, if there weren't black circles on the map, it would be the absolute worst thing. That would be the worst achievement. But because they show up on the map, they're a little bit easier to deal with, and also they've split them into little groups. So it'll be 8 for one collection, 10 for another. I think that makes it a little bit easier to deal with than, you know, something like Assassin's Creed 2's collect 100 feathers. I feel like the higher the number, the more difficult it is to deal with a collectible. Whereas doing the side missions, it literally was just, you might spend 10 minutes doing something, and if you die, the mission fails. So there's a chance you might spend even more time doing it to make up for your mistakes in a previous mission. So I think it's really up to you which one you think is worse, but either way, both just take up so much more time than necessary, and really feel like a relic from the era of when achievements were a very new concept, so they'd kind of just make up things to do in order to fill up their 1000G. So my final thoughts. Would I replay this? Probably not, honestly. There isn't enough interesting, replayable content for me, and the story lacks any real depth to bring me back to it. The gameplay also is just fine, it's mediocre, It's passable, but I don't feel as if it's unique or captivating. It's very slow, it's very clunky. For instance, you have a gun wheel where you have to tap, on Xbox, you have to tap left or right on the D-pad to reach the weapon you want. So say if you want the assault rifle, which could be the 4th or 5th one, you have to scroll through each one just to get the weapon you want, which in a gunfight can be very frustrating. There also were a lot of bugs I ran into, for instance like the helicopter one I'd said, which just led to a lot of unnecessary deaths. And the vehicles being bad again led to a lot of unnecessary deaths, so I think I don't miss those experiences, and the fact that I keep constantly reiterating these things is kind of evidence that they were a real issue. I don't, however, regret playing and finishing it, but it didn't exactly make me think, you know, in 10 years' time I'll remember and I'll miss this game, like I might have with something like Saints Row 2 or GTA San Andreas, or something like that. However, I would say Just Cause 2 I would miss, and the reason I'm mentioning this is because Just Cause 2 very clearly built upon this game's foundations and improved upon the weaknesses and that sort of thing. So they definitely did take the good sides of this, the foundations of this, and built upon it to make another brilliant game, more brilliant game. So how has it aged, and is it as good or bad as it was on release? I'd say it's aged fairly badly. The visuals are definitely very dated now, and some of the controls are very odd, such as having jump be the B button, and grenade throwing being LB. I think both of those things would put off a much younger audience, and would just make it a little bit awkward to come back to the game after having played, say, Halo or Grand Theft Auto or whatever else. I think as well those CGI cutscenes really do hold it back as well. It's definitely a relic of a bygone era. You wouldn't look at those now and be like, oh yeah, they look great. I wouldn't say it's the worst of its genre though. Something like GTA 3, for instance, could be worse for the gameplay side of things, for instance. GTA 3 struggled a lot with bad lock-on and had some horrible missions from like Staunton Island onwards. However, I wouldn't say Just Cause is going to be a cult classic. Compared to when it released, it's also a very oversaturated market now. Most free roam games have, you know, these things such as destruction, a big map, collectibles, side missions, which means that this game is kind of fighting for its place in a market that's already overcrowded. But the grapple hook and the maneuverability of this game, when it's done right, are very hard to match. The only thing I can even think of that's similar in this era would be Destroy Humans with the jetpack and the UFO, but even then that's not very close. Let me know if you know of any others. And actually another thing would be the reasonably complex faction system, which come with scaled rewards as you get more faction reputation. I do think those things lend it to the staying power of this game. So if I had to rate this game on a scale of 0 to 5, I would give this a 2 out of 5. It had some fun moments, and I didn't hate playing it. Just Cause is always a really good game for releasing tension and causing chaos, but those issues with bugs and vehicles honestly just came really annoying towards the end. I don't hate it, I don't love it, I'm apathetic. Sadly for Just Cause 1.
Apathy is death.
Apathy is death.
Apathy is death. Apathy is death.
Apathy is death.
If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment if you have any thoughts of your own. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!